This is Music Matters on BBC Radio 3 with me, Kate Molleson. Now, the BBC has launched its Soundscapes for Wellbeing project as a way to connect us with nature, at the heart of which is the virtual nature experiments created by the University of Exeter in conjunction with the BBC. Now, the point here is to find out how digital experiences of the natural world can impact health and well-being, which of course could not be more timely when many of us are craving open skies and cannot get to them. But can virtual birds and sunsets really be a surrogate for the restorative power of the real deal? Well, the research is being led by Alex Smalley, a PhD researcher at the University of Exeter, and he has enlisted the help of the world-renowned sound recordist Chris Watson and the film composer Nainita Desai. So Alex begins by telling us, scientifically speaking, why nature does what it does to us.
There's one school of thought which says that, we evolved in natural environments, therefore we have a sort of an innate biophilic appreciation for rich, verdant natural scenes which help us to thrive and survive. And then there's another school of thought which says, actually, there's a whole bunch of qualities which are inherent in natural environments, which are really good at helping us to relax and recover when we're stressed. So we invoke these theories of soft fascination, of stimuli which capture our attention very gently, like sunlight coming through a woodland canopy, or sunlight dancing on the surface of water. But of course, there's also this idea that memories and cultural associations, the attachments that we form with landscapes, are really important.
Can you give us a sense of how you're testing out your theory here?
Well, so much of how we understand people's sort of interactions and relationships with nature comes from laboratory studies. And in those studies, what we've done is we've asked people to view photos of natural environments or videos or listen to soundscapes. And a lot of the time we've used that, what we call exposure to nature in the laboratory, as a way for understanding how people actually interact and experience nature in the real world. And what we're trying to do with this experiment is actually view those experiences as having value in their own right. So that actually for people who can't get outside, if their main way of experiencing natural environments is at home, either on TV or on the computer, then how do we understand those better and understand the things which are going on? When we have these encounters with nature at home, whether that's through, quite a passive, silent experience, say watching a view out of a window, or it might be incredibly rich and multisensory and be something, say, like a landmark nature documentary like Planet Earth or Blue Planet, which has these huge orchestral scores, these amazing soundscapes that accompany it. How do each of those factors play a role in our experiences?
Chris Watson, a recent podcast that you made reminded me of the brilliant axiom that radio is a more powerful tool than telly because it has better pictures. I wonder, are you hoping that the findings of this experiment will conclude that, in fact, the most powerful impact is through sound?
I would agree with you, Kate, of course. I mean, and I think with my work, that's what, bizarrely, I try and do with my composition, the pieces that I create for film, television, radio installations. Sound is a great stimulant to our imagination, and it's very visceral. It doesn't need any great artistic justification. I mean, as much as anybody, music and powerful sounds of the natural world strike into our hearts and imaginations they make a very direct connection. And so I'm really interested to see the outcome from this experiment, but I have a very good idea from the start. I've had the privilege of travelling the world, and I have yet to meet anybody from any culture across the world who's not positively influenced by the sounds of the natural world. I'm a strong believer that all our music across all our cultures has evolved from people listening to the natural world and either mimicking that or wanting to work with it or sing along to it. That sense of vibration and empathy is innate within us, and I'm hoping that this experiment will reveal this in a sort of more empirical way so that it can be evidenced properly.
Nainita, can I bring you in here? Because I wonder, what's the trick of adding a score to that mix? How do you write music that respects the integrity of the existing natural sounds and make sure that you don't over emotionally charge what you contribute?
I mean, it is a very controversial subject because what we hear is important because it influences how we feel about the visuals emotionally. Why do films have a musical soundtrack? It's actually a very strange concept when you think about it because it's not grounded in reality. I don't walk around the streets of London with a soundtrack or songs accompanying everything that I do, but films crave soundtracks. And why? Because as filmmakers manipulate their audiences. Music is emotional. It makes our body respond by dancing, and our facial expressions change, and not to mention how it changes our brain in a scientific way. So in terms of wildlife, I mean, I've written the music for many wildlife films over the years, and music is not ever an element of the story. But in wildlife films, the emotional guidance that we hear is very, very strong compared to other films because it lays human feelings rooted in a history of cinematic scoring for human situations over animal behavior. And so there has to be this balance where you hear more of the natural sounds of the habitat and the atmospheres and the voices of the animals and the silence that speak naturally in the wild, and balanced with music. And so music's become this very, very important tool in engaging viewers and creating a narrative in wildlife films.
Yeah, Alex, I wonder, talking about the innate drama and emotional impact of certain natural sounds, have we discovered yet what are the big hitters? Is it blackbirds? Is it robins? Is it waves on beaches? Do we know yet?
We've definitely got some evidence to suggest that people like listening to this sort of passerine bird song. So that's your classics like your blackbird, your wren, your song thrush, the kind of familiar hedgerow or rooftop birds. And there's a long history of people using sounds like whale song in sort of therapeutic settings. So there's definitely precedence for this stuff. Actually putting the evidence towards how good some of these soundscapes are at eliciting certain emotions is something which we're really interested in discovering a bit more. And this fusion between the sort of visual aesthetic, natural sounds, and music is really what we're hoping to focus on here in this experiment. And it's something really that's never been looked at before.
Chris?
One thing I would add to that is that some of my sound installations, one thing I've discovered that sounds which are less dynamic, so not highly percussive or have a wide dynamic range, but are very rich in harmonics, have a particular calming, soothing, described as tranquil effect. Our hearing first develops when we're 16 weeks old in our mother's womb. So we first experience the world of sound through amniotic fluid, and so it's diffused through that. So maybe, just maybe, that's why we describe sounds as waves on the beach or wind through trees as tranquil, because perhaps in some way we're remembering how the world was before we were even born.
There's a couple of studies that have come out recently that have shown when you create these soundscapes, I mean actually waves breaking on a beach, particularly rough surf, can sound an awful lot like a motorway from a distance. And actually what's interesting is when you blend these two types of sound to create something which people can't tell whether it's human in origin or natural in origin, but you tell them it's one or the other, that instantly changes their perspective on how they sort of evaluate it as being potentially restorative or tranquil or not. So there is also something going on there with this learned behaviour, with the memories that we've laid down earlier in life.
Nainita, I wonder, do you as a composer think about these very innate, very deep responses we have to certain natural sounds and wonder whether you can replicate that in your music?
Yeah, very much so. I started off as a sound designer on feature films and then moved into composing. And so the combination of, as Chris describes, the entire soundscape, the soundtrack of a film, where the sound design and the music are intertwined to create this blurring of the lines between the two, where you are subconsciously influencing the viewer, is incredibly powerful.
Bringing this back to the experiment, Alex, the outcomes.
I guess if you take sort of, to some extent, often a standard model of care in a care home or in a clinical setting, which might just be a TV at the end of a bed. You know, I feel like we can and should be possibly doing a bit better than that. Can we bring, for example, some of the changing aesthetic of nature into, say, a hospital setting? Or can we use soundscapes in a way which gives people a bit of a diurnal rhythm as much as anything else? You know, these concepts aren't just limited to watching or nature on a screen or listening to it in headphones. Hopefully, you know, they'll be able to be much broader than that. We hope that it goes into the big pot of understanding that we have to help develop what we call a therapeutic intervention, but really something which could take lots of different forms.
Alex Smalley of the University of Exeter, and I was also talking to Nainita Desai and Chris Watson. You can take part in their experiment. Just go to bbc.co.uk/soundscapes for wellbeing, where you will also find links to the Sound Effects archive. You can indulge your inner Chris Watson. Now is your moment to craft your own personal Attenborough documentary soundtrack, and I also suspect it spells homeschooling gold for potential young sound engineers out there. Literally 33,000 sounds to get lost in.